Well, I think transitioning a little bit into some of our more discussion-oriented topics, I think we're going to continue on the theme of talking about a little bit of nerdy object lessons here, Jonathan, and what you had in mind to discuss next.
Yeah. So, and I don't think we discussed this, or if we do, we just touched on it briefly. But, as I've been trying to think about what does a world look like where I might be able to ask Dropbox to write an article on my own stuff, right? What does that look like when we have AI sort of integrated into every little thing? And there's all kinds of, people generally go immediately to Skynet or immediately to Wall-E, or something like that. But I thought that there's a kind of a fictional representation that may be a little more accurate, and that's Star Wars. So I don't consider myself a big nerd necessarily, but I've always been fascinated with Star Wars since I was a kid. And so I confess to knowing probably more about Star Wars than your average person. And so what's interesting about Star Wars is that Star Wars is a world where AI is constant. So, droids fly ships and C-3PO walks around and knows more languages than anybody else and all the protocol stuff. And then you have occasional rogue droids. If you watch the Mandalorian, you've got IG-88 that goes nuts and tries to kill everybody. And, and so like this is a constant feature. And yet what's interesting to me is that the droids, which is kind of, Star Wars AI, the droids are constantly there. They are part of what happens, but the stories that play out are distinctly human stories. And I know that Star Wars is not history and it's not reality. And so I'm not making that argument. And yet part of the reason Star Wars is so appealing is because it looks like reality in a different place to most people. And so think about the fact that like you have Owen Lars, who is the uncle of Luke on Tatooine, who is just this redneck, backwoods, backwater farmer, right? I mean, he farms moisture for crying out loud. It doesn't get more kind of bottom of the barrel menial labor. And yet he's buying a droid to talk to the binary code or whatever the language they use on some moisture evaporator. In other words, for him, that technology is just seamlessly integrated into his very rural, very simple life, contrasted to say somebody on one of the main planets in the series or in the universe or whatever. And so, in other words, it's interesting that despite this availability of an advanced technology, it helps, it assists, it occasionally gets in the way. It sometimes moves the plot forward. It sometimes saves the day. It sometimes gets in the way of and puts everybody in danger. But at the heart of it, there's still a human story. And it's the humans that are actually doing the important things and driving the stuff forward. Even when they are tripped up by a droid or thwarted by a droid, it's still ultimately something human that gets around it. And again, I'm not getting confused here. This is a story. It's an imagination. But it's an interesting story because people relate to it because it looks so bizarre and yet so familiar. And I tend to think that it's likely that that kind of reality is a little closer to the reality of constant AI than we tend to think. That we're likely to find an AI world where all of us are using it at some level, and it is making us do very different things. The people in Star Wars can jump through hyperspace and they can, do all these different things, right? And so we can do different things, but it will not fundamentally change the human things that we've been doing all along. So that was sort of the interesting riff I was taking with that, David.
Yeah. And I think that really the main takeaway point that I'm hearing from this is that we as humans, when we want to hear a compelling story that we enjoy, we need to be able to relate to the character. And simply put, an artificial intelligence, no matter how human seeming it is not terribly relatable to us. And so that's why Star Wars focuses pretty much entirely on human characters with artificial intelligence droids as assistant characters.
C-3PO and R2-D2 are always the sidekicks. They're never the stars. And I think that as we go forward, I think there's something interesting here. If we believe that we're made in the image of God, then we're creators. Like God is the creator, but we are creators who create in God's image. And as creators, we respond to created things, to new things. So AI at its most powerful right now is always an amalgamation, amalgamation. I'm not sure. Amalgamation. Thank you, David. Look at David. He's helped me with all of the references to TV characters, pop stars, and my pronunciation. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this, folks. Who needs AI when you've got David? An amalgamation. Say it again.
Amalgamation.
I had an N instead of an M there. Of all the other content. So in other words, AI can never kick out something truly original. It's always a blending of the things. Now, I would argue that to some extent that's true of humans as well, that God created all the original stuff and we reblend it.
Yeah.
But there's still an order of magnitude that is really, really noticeable between, basically AI is blending what was blended. It can't blend at the next level up. So God made, and then we take that and put it in new things, and then AI takes that and put it in new things. Okay, well that whatever AI is putting in new things is pretty interesting, but it's not as close to the original sources as where humans are, and so therefore I believe there will always be a recognizable difference between those two things. AI might create a really interesting new painting by pulling things together that have never been seen before, but it will pull things together that were all created by humans to create that new thing, where humans were pulling things together that was made by God to create the new thing. And that order of magnitude between those two will, I would submit, almost always be noticeable to some extent. And I don't mean noticeable like, technology is going to get better. It'll be tough to see a deep fake from a real thing, but yet the deep fake will never be able to speak the way a human would, because it's always going to be pulling together a blend of what the humans already came up with. So, and I think that's, you see that reflected in Star Wars, right? I mean, like the droids are always, they're one aspect of something humans put into them that they're playing out. And they're therefore, they're always more 2-dimensional than 3-dimensional versus the human characters.
Yeah. And I think I'll jump off of this and use this as sort of my discussion point and continue to draw this parallel to, I think that supports this point into the sort of other big fantasy universe, which is Star Trek. And I think there's mentioned both a couple times previous episodes of the podcast, in that there's a couple interesting parallels that you can draw here. The most obvious of which is in the show Star Trek: The Next Generation, there is Data, who is an android, and he is an officer on the USS Enterprise, and he is incredibly intelligent, incredibly capable. But the reason that he is such a beloved character and is a main character for some episodes of the show, so it almost sounds like it's going to break our theory here. But the reason that I think that he can be an interesting main character is that he is an artificial intelligence that recognizes that even though he has so many advantages of being an artificial intelligence over humans, all he wants is to be human, because he isn't able to fully feel and experience things the way that humans are able to experience them. He's not able to fully relate to a human organic experience. And that is just one of the primary struggles of his character throughout the entire show. And what makes him so interesting is the fact that he does recognize that, and he looks for different ways that he can find new human experiences and try to feel some of the same things that humans feel. And sometimes when he messes up and some of his crewmates are upset with him, he realizes, wait, it's because I don't experience things the same way that humans do. And so I think that's one of the most fascinating cases for how, ultimately, even he as an AI, even in a fictional universe, is still able to recognize that the thing that ultimately matters the most is humanity and the thing that he wants most.
I think it's excellent stuff, David. I think that there's another parallel to run here. I read this somewhere and I can't remember where it was. So this is not a biblical, this was an interpretation of a biblical thing, right? But in this story, the character is interacting with an angel, and the angel is saying that at some level, they are jealous of the human, and the human is going, why? You have all these amazing powers. You live in the presence of God and all these things. And the angel is basically saying, I never had a choice to prove my allegiance to the creator. I was I was created into the glory of God and could never see anything else but. Now, for those of you who are theological nerds out there, I realize there's some theological holes in that with Satan and all these kinds of things. So just suspend that for a second. But it's an interesting perspective to say one of the things that you see as a weakness is in fact this amazing thing. And I heard another theologian argue that don't pay attention to the fact there are some things you can never do in heaven. And you say, well, what do you mean? Heaven's a place you can do everything. No, there's no longer an opportunity to choose in heaven. This is the only place that you can choose Christ. You can do that. And I think there's interesting, based on what you just said, David, no matter what's going on with AI, no matter what the headlines are telling you, most of which are way inflated beyond what is actually reality, no matter whether we get to general intelligence or not, we can have a superhuman, super intelligent, all-knowing, in terms of the world's knowledge, machine that maybe even controls our lives. That does not change the fact that the machine will still be just processing things that have already been processed. And those things were processed by humans. And it will still not be able to choose. And to your analogy to the Star Trek character, at some level, he knows he can never be fully human. To be fully human is to have that frailty, to have that limited knowledge, to have that failure, and to be able to come to terms with it and choose about it. And that's a comforting, perhaps offered as a comforting thought, no matter what kind of scary AI headlines are out there.
Thank you so much for watching this clip of the Alternative Ideas podcast. If you want to see some more of the clips like this one, or if you want to see the full episodes where these clips come from, you can check those out here on the Alternative Ideas podcast YouTube channel.